Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story that sounds more like a movie than real life. Imagine this: a 20-year-old standing alone in a torch-lit palace, the scent of blood and wine still heavy in the air. His father, murdered, his rivals, circling, his empire, fragile. And yet this young man is about to set off on a journey that will shake the world. His name? Alexander. You might know him as the Great. But tonight, we ask a different question. How on earth did a 20-year-old conquer half the known world? Fair warning, you probably wouldn't survive 10 minutes in his sandals. The betrayals alone would give you insomnia. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it over there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Aigai, the ancient capital of Macedonia. It's hot, the air smells like dust and metal, and people are whispering nervously. A royal wedding is supposed to be a celebration, but this one ends in horror. King Philip II, proud and powerful, steps into the theater, turns to wave, and drops dead. Assassinated, right in front of hundreds of nobles. Right in front of his son. That son is Alexander. He's just 20 years old, and suddenly the entire world is staring at him. No time to grieve, no time to flinch. The throne is empty, and Alexander steps into it like he was born for this exact moment. But that doesn't mean anyone else believes in him yet. Let's be clear, Macedonia is not some sleepy kingdom. It's a war machine. And like all war machines, it's surrounded by enemies, jealous nobles, ambitious generals, nervous neighbors. The moment Philip dies, everyone starts whispering the same question. Can this boy really lead an empire? And many are already betting on no. Some of the whispers are louder than others. One rival claims he should be king. Several generals start conveniently disappearing from court. Distant parts of the empire, especially the wild northern tribes, begin breaking their loyalty. If Alexander isn't careful, he'll lose the throne before he's even sat on it properly. Here's where things get spicy. Most 20-year-olds might try to stall. Maybe send out a few messages, hold a meeting or two, ask mom for advice. Not Alexander. Within days, he acts. Fast, hard, no mercy. Think of it as the ancient version of cleaning house. The man who may have ordered the assassination? Executed. Nobles who showed hesitation? Publicly shamed or removed. Alexander even forces the army and nobility to swear loyalty to him immediately. Not next week. Now. One scholar puts it bluntly. He won the throne with his father's blood still on the floor. Historians still argue whether Alexander had any part in the assassination. Did he know it was coming? Was it his idea? There's no proof, just shadows. But what we do know is that he moved like someone who'd been planning for this moment his whole life. And in a way, he had. You see, Alexander didn't grow up like a normal prince. He was trained to rule from the minute he could walk. His dad, Philip, was a genius general and a manipulative statesman. But Philip didn't just teach Alexander how to ride horses or swing swords. He gave him real power early. He let him command troops in battle at just 16. That's right, 16. While most kids were learning to shave, Alexander was learning to flank enemy cavalry. And the education? Oh boy. Aristotle was his private tutor. Yes, the Aristotle. Every afternoon, Alexander studied ethics, philosophy, medicine, poetry, and military strategy, of course. His childhood was basically a mix of Hunger Games and Harvard. That's one weird summer camp. So now, back in Aigai, Alexander's using every lesson he's ever learned. He's not just securing the throne, he's performing for an audience. His army, his nobles, his rivals, the world. He's got the voice of a commander, the stare of a predator, and a wild sense of destiny. People say he believed he was descended from Achilles, or maybe even a god. And honestly, when he talks, you start to believe it too. One small but curious detail. Alexander kept a copy of Homer's Iliad under his pillow. Annotated by Aristotle. Yeah, sleep tight. Now, don't imagine he's all serious and brooding. He had a flair for drama. During one of his first public appearances as king, he rode through the streets in shining armor on his giant horse, Bucephalus, the horse no one else could tame. Picture a 20-year-old influencer, but instead of a Ferrari, it's a black warhorse trained to rear on command. Subtle, right? But this wasn't just for show. Alexander needed momentum. He knew that if he gave his enemies time, they'd swarm. So he started moving. In the first few weeks after Philip's death, Alexander crushed a rebellion in northern Macedonia, forced Greek city-states to reconfirm their loyalty, convinced rival noble families that their future was best served by staying very, very quiet. It's hard to say which part is more impressive, the speed or the sheer confidence. And let's not forget, he wasn't just dealing with politics. He was dealing with people. Older, more experienced, and often way more ruthless. But somehow they fell in line. Why? Because Alexander didn't hesitate. And in ancient power games, hesitation is blood in the water. One fringe theory even suggests that Alexander used religious rituals to seal his image as divinely chosen. Some say he held special ceremonies at night, lit only by torches, to present himself as a kind of warrior priest. It sounds dramatic, but Alexander was dramatic. And that theatrical edge? It worked. Within a month, this 20-year-old kid had gone from maybe next in line to unchallenged ruler of the most powerful army in the world. Think about that the next time you're putting off sending an email. And just when you think he might pause to breathe, he starts looking east, toward Persia. Because Alexander wasn't content with keeping what he inherited. He wanted more. He wanted everything. You're barely used to the sound of people calling you king, and already fires are breaking out all around the borders. That's Alexander's reality. He's 20, freshly crowned, and his empire feels like it's made of paper held together with hope and threats. But instead of patching things up gently, he reaches for a sledgehammer. You remember those northern tribes? The ones who never really liked Macedonian rule in the first place? Yeah, they hear the king as a kid now and think, sweet, let's break free. Within weeks of Philip's assassination, rebellions start bubbling. In the old days, that meant months of planning and marching. Alexander? He gathers his elite troops and hits the road. Fast. This is the first time the army gets a real look at what kind of king he'll be. Spoiler, not the kind who waits around. They're marching through thick forests, the kind where the trees whisper, and the rocks always seem to shift under your feet. These aren't gentle landscapes. They're ambush-friendly, narrow, and muddy. But Alexander charges ahead like he's got fire in his blood. He doesn't delegate. He leads. The rebels? They don't stand a chance. In one campaign alone, he defeats several tribes, captures key fortresses, and even crosses the Danube River, a feat nobody expected, especially not in spring flood season. It's like if someone decided to take a Sunday drive across an overflowing Amazon River with an army. Historians still debate whether this campaign was a brilliant military move or just a flex to scare everyone else. Either way, it works. The northern borders go quiet, quickly. But Alexander's not done yet. News comes in that Thebes and Athens, two huge powerhouses of ancient Greece, are whispering rebellion. Again. See, Philip had spent decades convincing Greek city-states to join a league under his control. Some agreed, some pretended to. Now that he's dead, they smell opportunity. Thebes, in particular, goes full, let's see what happens. They toss out Macedonian officials and start arming themselves. Alexander hears about it, and instead of sending a warning, he teleports there. Okay, not literally, but close. He marches 300 kilometers in under 2 weeks. That's like someone texting, "I'm outside," before you even realized you invited them. The bees panics. They thought they had time, maybe even allies. But Alexander is suddenly at their doorstep, army fully armed, breathing war. Now he gives them a chance to surrender. And here's the kicker. They say no. Bold move. So he flattens them, literally. In one of the most ruthless moves of his career, Alexander destroys Thebes almost completely. The walls crumble, the houses burn, and over 30,000 people are either killed or sold into slavery. Not PG-13 bedtime story stuff, I know, but real. Athens? They were thinking about rebelling too. But after watching what happened to Thebes, they suddenly remember they've always really liked Macedonia. Such a coincidence. This moment tells the world one very clear thing. Don't test Alexander. Not his patience, not his resolve, not even his schedule. It's easy to think this was just cruelty. But look closer, and you'll see a clever psychological play. He didn't just win, he warned. One historian said it best. Thebes was sacrificed to save 1,000 other cities. Dark, but strategic. There's also a weird little detail most people skip. Before destroying Thebes, Alexander allegedly spared only one house, that of the poet Pindar. Why? Because Alexander loved Greek poetry. Even in rage, he made a poetic exception. That's the thing with him. He wasn't a robot. He was this strange mix of bloodthirsty general, philosophy nerd, and part-time diva. After the destruction of Thebes, the Greek world goes silent. Every city, every leader is suddenly on their best behavior. You'd think Alexander would take a victory lap. Instead, he starts prepping to leave. Wait, what? He's finally got Greece under control. The kingdom is relatively stable. His army worships him. So obviously, now is the perfect time to pack up and launch a full-scale invasion of Asia. You heard right. Barely months into his reign, Alexander decides it's time to march into Persia, the biggest empire in the world at the time. On paper, it's lunacy. Persia has hundreds of thousands of soldiers, legendary cities, a navy that could blanket the sea. Meanwhile, Alexander has, well, 40,000-ish troops, some boats, and a grudge. But here's the catch. Persia isn't what it used to be. Its last great king, Cyrus the Great, had built a monster. But now, King Darius III isn't exactly striking fear into hearts. The empire is bloated, slow, and riddled with internal squabbling. Still big, still dangerous, but maybe not. Sharp. And Alexander smells blood. He also knows that Philip had once dreamed of invading Persia. It had been the ultimate goal, to get revenge for past invasions, especially the one led by Xerxes, who burned Athens during the Greco-Persian Wars. Alexander sees himself as the man to finish what his father started. Plus, real talk, he wants the glory. He's obsessed with the heroes of old. Achilles, Heracles, Jason. He doesn't just want to read about them, he wants to become them. So he spends months prepping. He doesn't just pack swords. He studies maps. He gathers translators. He meets with spies. He even consults priests and oracles. In fact, he allegedly asks the Oracle of Delphi for a prediction. But when they say, "Come back tomorrow," he grabs the priestess by the arm and drags her to the temple. Under pressure, she blurts out, "You are invincible, my son." Guess who loved that answer? That oracle line becomes one of the many tools in his image-building campaign. He's not just a king. He's a chosen king. Meanwhile, the Persian Empire barely notices. They've dealt with Greek adventurers before. They figure this one will show up, cause a mess, get tired, and go home. But this one isn't here to play tourist. Alexander finally crosses into Asia Minor in the spring of 334 BCE. He steps onto the beach, throws a spear into the ground, and declares the entire land his by right of conquest. That's dramatic, but it sets the tone. This 20-year-old isn't playing defense. He's not protecting a throne. He's claiming the world. So now you're standing on the shores of Asia Minor. Behind you? Europe. Familiar soil, familiar threats. Ahead? Persia, the vast, glittering giant you're supposed to conquer with 40,000 soldiers and a really solid self-esteem. Alexander's army crosses the Hellespont, that skinny stretch of water dividing Europe and Asia, and the symbolism is heavy. This is the moment he breaks with the old world. There's no turning back. It's like that slow step off a diving board, except below is a superpower with a bad temper and an army that could eat yours for breakfast. But Alexander doesn't blink. As soon as they land, he pays tribute to Troy. Yeah, that Troy. The ruined city from Homer's Iliad. He offers sacrifices at Achilles' supposed tomb, runs naked in honor of the hero, and swaps gifts with his best friend Hephaestion, because they both believe they're the modern-day Achilles and Patroclus. Historians still argue whether Alexander truly believed all this divine destiny stuff, or if he just acted like he did to inspire his troops. Either way, it works. His men start to believe they're part of something bigger than just a paycheck and a sandwich. Then comes the first test, the Battle of the Granicus River. The Persians finally notice him. Local satraps, governors with soldiers to spare, gather their cavalry and line up along the river. They've got the high ground, the numbers, and the advantage. Alexander, he's got a strategy and a bit of a death wish. Most generals would wait, camp overnight, maybe look for a better crossing. Alexander just rides into the river. Literally. The battle begins with a splash. Macedonian horsemen charge through chest-deep water, dodging arrows and fighting against the current. Alexander himself leads the front line, which is about as safe as swimming through shark-infested soup wearing barbecue sauce. At one point, a Persian noble actually strikes Alexander in the head with an axe. He's saved at the last second by his bodyguard Cletus, who slices the attacker in two. Friendly reminder, always be nice to your bodyguards. And then the tide turns. Macedonian infantry follows, their long spears, called sarissas, reaching enemy lines before Persian weapons can even get close. Think of it like fighting with pool noodles. Except one sides are 18 feet long and made of murder. The Persians break. It's a shocking victory. And it's not just military, it's psychological. Alexander has just walked into enemy territory, faced his first battle, and won, loudly. He treats wounded enemies with honor, sends armor back to Athens as trophies, and makes sure the world knows the boy king just beat Persia on its own turf. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Alexander doesn't just kill and conquer. He starts doing this very specific, very smart thing. He absorbs. Instead of tearing down every Persian system he sees, he keeps some in place, leaves satraps in charge, as long as they behave, respects local customs, even pays temple tributes. It's like a software update, not a factory reset. Why? Because he's thinking long-term. He doesn't want to just beat the Persian Empire. He wants to become it. Meanwhile, something fringe and frankly hilarious starts circulating. Apparently, Alexander is convinced his breath smells sweet because he's descended from gods. You know, like regular people have morning breath, but he has divine breeze. A little weird? Sure. But hey, if it keeps the morale up. Now, with Western Asia Minor under control, Alexander sets his sights further inland. The next big target? Sardis, one of the most important cities in the Persian Empire. When he gets there, the city surrenders almost instantly. Not a sword lifted, and Alexander, in a rare moment of soft flourish, orders a temple to be built to Zeus and declares Sardis free. Then there's Halicarnassus, a tougher nut to crack, fortified, wealthy, and guarded by Persian loyalists. This time, the fighting is brutal, street by street, building by building. The city is eventually burned in the process, which historians still debate. Was it intentional, a warning, or just the chaos of war? Whatever the cause, Alexander wins again, and his reputation starts to glow. People begin to see him not just as a warrior, but as something more, maybe even divine. Word spreads. The young king is invincible. The gods walk with him. Merchants whisper it. Peasants repeat it. Even some Persians start switching sides. One fun tidbit from this period, Alexander supposedly had his hair curled in the style of Heracles and wore a lion-skin cape, just like the mythical hero. Subtle as always, but here's where the pace shifts. Instead of storming every fortress in sight, Alexander starts founding cities. Yes, cities, dozens of them. All named, wait for it, Alexandria. The most famous one? Near the Nile, but we're not there yet. For now, these new Alexandrias serve as military bases, supply hubs, and cultural fusion zones. He doesn't just want an empire that obeys, he wants one that remembers him forever. Think about it. This 20-something isn't just slashing through maps, he's rewriting them. By now, he's got a reputation. Persian commanders start abandoning their posts, satraps defect or flee. The Persian court begins to worry. They'd assumed this Greek prince would be a flash in the pan. But suddenly, he's carving a path straight toward the Persian heartland. Alexander's campaign isn't just fast, it's dizzying. No one can keep up. His army is tired but loyal. They've won every battle, eaten well off enemy supplies, gained treasure, and they believe their king is unstoppable. But not everyone is convinced. In the shadows, King Darius III of Persia is preparing. He's gathering a force that will dwarf everything Alexander has ever faced. A real army, with elephants, with full royal cavalry, with the gold of half the world behind it. And when that army meets Alexander, it won't be by a river. It'll be in a valley, a place called Issus. You've marched for months, fought through cities and rivers, built new towns out of dust, and still, Alexander doesn't slow down. His eyes are already locked on the next battle, and this one isn't some border skirmish or local rebellion. No, this is the real deal. You're about to meet Darius III, the King of Kings, Lord of the Persian Empire, and the man who now sees you as a serious threat. Alexander's army moves north along the coast toward what is now southern Turkey. He's tracking Darius, but the Persian king pulls a classic now you see me move, sneaking behind Alexander's army through the mountains. Suddenly, Alexander realizes the tables have turned. He's now the one being flanked. But instead of panicking, he backtracks fast and meets the Persians at a narrow coastal plain near a small town called Issus. Now picture this. You're part of Alexander's army. It's windy, the terrain is tight, and the sea glints cold and blue to one side. On the other, steep mountains rise like walls. There's nowhere to run. Perfect for the smaller army, horrible for the huge one. And that's exactly the trap Darius walks into. His massive force, some say 100,000 men, others whisper even more, is bottlenecked in this valley. Think of it like trying to shove a full marching band into a hallway. Doesn't matter how good your instruments are, nobody's moving freely. Alexander lines up his troops, studies the terrain, and places himself in his favorite spot. The danger zone, right flank, cavalry charge, front row seats to chaos. When the signal is given, the Macedonians move like clockwork. The phalanx pushes the Persian center, long spears pinning enemies like skewers. On the right, Alexander and his cavalry smash through Darius's guard like a bowling ball through wine glasses. Dust clouds swirl, horses scream, swords flash. And somewhere in that madness, Darius sees Alexander coming straight for him. Now here's where things get juicy. Darius, surrounded by chaos, watches his elite guards fall. He panics. He turns his chariot around and runs. Yep, the King of Kings bails. Historians still argue about whether this was cowardice or just a tactical retreat. Either way, it's not a good look. The Persian army sees their king vanish and, like dominoes, begins to collapse. The Macedonians slaughter thousands. And just like that, Alexander wins one of the most important battles of his life. But what really seals the moment? What happens after the fighting stops? In Darius's royal camp, Alexander finds his entire family, his mother, wife, and daughters. Awkward, right? Even more awkward, they think Alexander is Darius and throw themselves at his feet. Alexander, to his credit, helps them up gently and tells them not to fear. He treats them with honor, spares their lives, and even allows Darius's wife to keep her royal title. This right here isn't just kindness, it's optics. News spreads. Alexander doesn't just win. He behaves like a king should. Merciful, noble, almost too perfect. And then comes the letter. Darius sends a message offering ransom for his family, peace terms, and land. He's basically saying, let's just end this. Keep what you've got. I'll rule the rest. Alexander's reply? I'm now the king of Asia. If you want your family back, come get them yourself. Oof. The confidence here is nuclear, but it's not totally unjustified. After Issus, Alexander controls most of the eastern Mediterranean. His reputation skyrockets. Cities open their gates. Soldiers desert Persia and offer to join him. But not everything is wine and victory. The journey now leads him south, into Phoenicia, a coastal region packed with rich trading ports and powerful cities. Most of them surrender peacefully. Most. But then there's Tyre. Tyre, the jewel of the sea. It's a fortified island city just off the coast, with thick walls and an ego the size of the moon. When Alexander asks to enter and sacrifice at their temple, the Tyrians say, no thanks. Big mistake. Alexander does something absolutely bonkers. He orders a causeway, a massive land bridge, built across the water to reach the island. It's like trying to build a driveway to your neighbor's floating castle, all while they're throwing rocks and fireballs at you. It takes 7 months. Engineers work day and night, building out into the sea. Tyrians send ships to burn the bridge. Alexander builds towers, they knock them down. He builds them again. It's a watery game of rage-fueled Minecraft. Finally, the causeway reaches the walls. Siege towers roll forward. Battering rams slam. Troops pour in. Tyre falls. The punishment is brutal. Thousands are killed. Survivors are sold into slavery. Alexander doesn't mess around with second chances, especially not after being delayed for 7 months. One fun fact, after the battle, Alexander sacrifices at the temple just like he wanted to do in the first place. Talk about commitment to your original plan. But Tyre isn't the only city to make a mess. Just down the coast is Gaza. Same story. Proud city. Strong walls. Says no. Alexander lays siege again, this time under a hot desert sun. He's wounded in the shoulder by a catapult bolt. Doesn't stop him. When Gaza finally falls, he orders the commander dragged behind a chariot. Sound familiar? That's straight out of Achilles' playbook. This is the moment when Alexander starts leaning hard into the myth. He's not just Alexander anymore. He's becoming a living legend. And finally, the southern march reaches Egypt. Now, you might expect Egypt to fight, but they don't. They welcome Alexander. They're sick of Persian rule. They see him as a liberator, a new pharaoh. Alexander plays along. He makes sacrifices to Egyptian gods, learns local customs, and then he pulls a wild card move. He visits the Oracle of Siwa deep in the desert to ask a private question. No one knows exactly what he asks, but rumor says the priest calls him son of Zeus. And Alexander? He doesn't deny it. From here on, the divine whispers grow louder. You're not just marching with a general. You're following a man who believes the gods walk beside him. And maybe, just maybe, they do. You've just helped build a road across the sea, taken down the richest island fortress in the world, gotten sunburned in the Gaza siege, and been crowned pharaoh in Egypt. Not bad for a year's work. But don't get too comfortable. Alexander's gaze is turning east again. The goal? Still Darius. Still Persia. Still world domination. Because while Egypt bows at his feet, Darius isn't exactly knitting by the fire. He's raising another army, bigger, badder, more determined. And this time, the Persian king wants to finish what issues started. You and the Macedonians march north again, cutting through the Levant, crossing rivers and dusty plains until you reach the heart of Mesopotamia. And then you see it. The horizon, shimmering with sunlight and armor, is filled with hundreds of thousands of Persians. Chariots, elephants, cavalry that stretches as far as the eye can squint. And right in the middle, a royal platform. Darius, watching. This is Gaugamela, the biggest showdown of them all. Now, let's be real. Alexander is outnumbered. Again, some sources say by 5-1. The battlefield is wide open, perfect for chariots. Darius even had the terrain leveled beforehand. And you? You're standing there wondering if your sandals are tight enough to run in, just in case. But Alexander does what he always does. He studies. He listens. He waits. Then, just before dawn, he does something unexpected. He attacks. The Macedonians angle right, stretching their lines, pulling Persian troops with them. It's like opening a curtain just wide enough. And then, boom. Alexander rides hard through the gap, a wedge of cavalry slicing toward Darius himself. The moment is chaos. Persian scythe chariots try to mow down infantry, but Alexander's soldiers have trained for this. They open their ranks, let the chariots pass, then stab the drivers from behind like it's a violent trust fall. And just when it seems like Darius might actually hold the line, he panics. Again, chariot turns, royal platform abandoned. The King of Kings rides off into the dust, leaving his army behind. Historians still argue whether Darius could have won that day if he'd stood firm. Some say the battlefield favored him. Others think morale was already shattered. But once Darius fled, it didn't matter. The Persians broke. And the Macedonians? They didn't just win a battle. They won an empire. After Gaugamela, the Persian military backbone is shattered. Cities fall like dominoes. Babylon opens its gates and throws a party. Susa follows, and then the real prize. Persepolis, the glittering capital of Persia. Alexander marches in, and the world gasps. Because Persepolis isn't just a city. It's a symbol, a treasure hoard beyond imagining. Gold, jewels, thrones, the wealth of generations. And Alexander? He walks right into the palace of Xerxes, the king who burned Athens over 100 years ago. What happens next is a mix of vengeance, drama, and possibly too much wine. After a long celebratory night, the palace is burned, torched. Some say it was revenge for Athens. Others think Alexander regretted it the next morning. Hangovers do that. One quirky detail? The woman who may have convinced him to do it was a dancer named Thais. She supposedly gave a rousing speech and tossed the first torch. Flaming karma, anyone? Still, even after the flames die down, Alexander isn't done. Darius has escaped again, and Alexander is determined to end it, once and for all. He pursues him through the mountains of Media, through harsh weather, hostile terrain, and rebellious satraps who don't particularly care for either side. You might be wondering, why chase a defeated king? Why not just rule the empire and call it a day? Because Alexander doesn't just want to take Darius's throne. He wants legitimacy. The moment Darius is gone, Alexander becomes not just the conqueror of Persia, but its rightful successor. The hunt drags on for months. Alexander grows more brutal, more impatient. He punishes cities that resist, executes governors who waffle. You start to see a shift, less Achilles, more Zeus with a grudge. And then news arrives. Darius is dead, but not by Alexander's hand. He's been betrayed, stabbed by one of his own satraps, a man named Bessus, who wants to declare himself the new king of Persia. And Alexander? He's furious. Not relieved, not triumphant, furious. He finds Darius's body in a cart, abandoned in the dirt. He wraps it in royal robes, gives it a proper burial, and vows revenge, not just for Darius, but for the insult to his empire. Historians still argue whether this was politics or genuine respect. Maybe both. Maybe Alexander saw in Darius a version of himself, a king undone by betrayal, by cowardice, by fate. What's certain is this: Bessus is now enemy number one. The chase begins again, through mountain passes, across the Oxus River, into the wilds of Bactria, modern Afghanistan, where even maps start to look nervous. And here the terrain changes, not just the geography, but the people. Alexander isn't fighting organized armies anymore. He's hunting warlords, climbing icy cliffs, crossing rivers that freeze your soul. These aren't grand battles, they're grinds. Small, savage ambushes, snipers in the hills. Guerrilla warfare before that was even a phrase. And yet, he keeps going. He adapts. He marries local customs to Macedonian discipline, builds new outposts, accepts surrendered enemies into his army, even starts dressing more like a Persian king, wearing robes, sitting on a throne, introducing royal ceremony. It weirds out his men. You don't expect your war buddy to suddenly start wearing eyeliner and demand you kiss his hand. But Alexander isn't just fighting to rule Persia, he's becoming it. One fun fact from this stretch: supposedly, Alexander had a habit of naming mountain passes after himself. So somewhere in Central Asia, there may still be forgotten paths called Alexander's Neck, or Alex Gap. Humble guy. Eventually, Bessus is caught, betrayed just like he betrayed Darius. Alexander has him executed, but not quickly. He's mutilated, paraded, and then killed in a particularly cruel Persian method. Justice? Maybe. Message sent? Definitely. By now, the empire stretches thousands of miles, Greece to India, sea to mountains. But Alexander isn't done, because just over those icy ridges lies the next world. You've marched through deserts, battled under the stars, hunted kings through snow, and helped torch the most glamorous palace in the world. Your boots are worn down to the soles of your soul, and still, Alexander isn't satisfied. Because beyond the mountains of Bactria lies a place whispered in rumors. A land of strange animals, jeweled rivers, and warriors who ride elephants into battle. India, or at least the edge of it. What the Greeks know about this place could fit inside a bronze helmet, and most of it sounds made up. Golden ants, rivers of honey, tribes of one-eyed giants. You're half convinced you're walking into a myth. But Alexander? He's ready. He crosses the Hindu Kush, that terrifying range of sharp, ice-bitten peaks that chew up the unprepared. Your army moves slowly, men freezing at night, struggling to breathe in the thin air. Horses slip, supplies dwindle. And still, you keep climbing, because that's what Alexander does. He makes you believe the impossible is just a couple more miles away. Finally, the mountains give way to green valleys and rivers so wide they feel like oceans. You're now entering the land of the Indus Valley, and the people here are different. Different clothes, different gods, different war strategies. And they're not impressed by Alexander's resume. Most local rulers decide to surrender or form alliances. But not all. One of them is a fierce, proud king named Porus, who rules over a region near the Hydaspes River, now the Jhelum in modern Pakistan. He's tall, intimidating, and as Alexander learns, he brings war elephants to the battlefield. Now let's pause a second. You've seen chariots, cavalry, siege towers. But an elephant? That's a tank with tusks, 10 feet tall, armored, with a man on top throwing javelins, and there are dozens of them. Alexander sees this and, you guessed it, doesn't blink. He waits for the rains to come and flood the plains, knowing the muddy terrain will neutralize some of the elephant power. Then, under cover of night and storm, he secretly crosses the river upstream and launches a surprise attack on Porus's flank. The battle is a drenched, elephant-stomping, thunder-cracking nightmare. Men scream, horses panic, the elephants charge, smashing phalanxes like toys. Alexander's men jab at their feet, blind them, surround them. It's chaos, but eventually, skill, patience, and grit win out. Porus is defeated, but not broken. And here's where Alexander does something surprising. He spares him. He even asks Porus how he wants to be treated. The Indian king replies, like a king. Alexander loves that answer. He restores Porus to power and even gives him more territory. Historians still debate whether this was admiration or a calculated move to win loyalty. Maybe both. But the message is clear. Alexander doesn't just conquer. He absorbs. He bends enemies into friends, or at least useful governors. Still, Not everyone's thrilled about pressing deeper into India. The further east you go, the hotter it gets. The stranger the languages, the harder the terrain, and the more exhausted your army becomes. Diseases creep in. Elephants trample supply wagons. Jungle insects hum in your ears like curses. And then, your scouts return with news. There's another empire just ahead. The Nanda Empire, vast and terrifying, with thousands more elephants. And this one won't be caught by surprise. Alexander is hyped. Another challenge? Yes, please. But his men? They're done. You stand in mud, sword in hand, looking into the distance, and for the first time, you hear murmurs. No more. The army has marched for nearly 8 years, fought across 3 continents, crossed the known world. And now, at the banks of the Hyphasis River, now the Bees, they refuse to go any further. Alexander begs. He offers speeches, sacrifices, promises. He paces, shouts, sulks, and then he finally breaks. He agrees to turn back. Not because he's afraid, not because he's finished, but because even a man who believes he's the son of Zeus needs someone to follow him. And for once, no one will. They build 12 altars on the banks of the river, each taller than a man, to mark the eastern edge of Alexander's empire. It's symbolic, a line in the dirt that whispers, "We could have gone further." But they don't. The journey home begins, and it's anything but relaxing. Alexander decides not to backtrack the way they came, through safe mountain paths. No, he chooses a new, unknown route through the deadly Gedrosian desert. It's scorching, bone-dry, unforgiving. You walk under a sky so bright it feels like your brain is frying inside your helmet. Men collapse. Camels die. Water is so rare it's almost mythical. In one moment of pure drama, Alexander's soldiers find a tiny bowl of water and offer it to him. He pours it out onto the sand in front of them. "If my men can't drink," he says, "neither will I." Cheesy? Maybe. But the men love him for it. Eventually, the army emerges, fewer in number, sunburned into leather, but alive. They reach the Persian heartland again. Cities welcome them with parades. But something's changed. Alexander has seen the edge of the world, and now he wants to remake it. He starts acting less like a general and more like a god emperor. He wears Persian robes, holds feasts with nobles from all over the empire, marries Roxana, a Bactrian princess, encourages his men to marry locals too. He even tries to merge Greek and Persian customs, creating a new elite class made from both sides. But here's the catch. Not everyone is on board. Many of his Macedonian officers grumble. Some outright rebel. One night, in a drunken rage, Alexander kills Cleitus the Black, a trusted friend who had saved his life at Granicus. The argument? Cleitus said Alexander was forgetting his Macedonian roots. Historians still debate if this was grief, ego, or the pressure of holding an empire together with gold, charisma, and duct tape. But the cracks are showing. You're now part of an empire so vast, it's almost unmanageable. Cultures clash, old loyalties fracture. And even Alexander himself seems torn, between being a Greek hero and a Persian king, between conquering the world and ruling it. And then, something shifts. You return to Babylon, and fate begins to whisper. Babylon. Even the name feels heavy, like a crown too large for your head. The city is a jewel in the desert, where ziggurats rise from palm groves and the air smells like incense and ambition. You've come full circle. Back to the west, sort of, but not to Greece. Not to home. To the new heart of Alexander's world. He rides into Babylon not just as a general or even a king, but as a godlike figure. The people throw flowers, offer garlands, call him the King of Kings. And Alexander? He accepts it all with a strange, glowing calm. But something feels different. The man who charged into battle ahead of his phalanx now walks a little slower. He speaks with more weight, more silence. His eyes look east and west at once, as if he's trying to see everything everywhere. And maybe he is. Because now Alexander's no longer focused on conquest. Now he's planning unity. He wants to stitch the world together like some divine seamstress, threading Greek and Persian, warrior and scholar, mountain and sea. A fusion of East and West, one language, one economy, one army, one dream. It starts with mass weddings. In a grand ceremony at Susa, Alexander arranges for thousands of his soldiers to marry Persian women. He himself marries 2 more, Statera, daughter of Darius, and Parasatis, daughter of the previous Persian king. The message is clear. You're not invaders. You're family now. Historians still argue whether this was brilliant politics or cultural overreach. Maybe a little of both. Some men love it, others resent it. Your average Macedonian warrior didn't march a decade just to become a Persian in-laws guy. But Alexander doesn't stop there. He integrates Persians into his army, trains them in phalanx formation, gives them ranks, commands. He's not just building a kingdom, he's building an empire machine, powered by loyalty, law, and just enough fear. And to do that, he needs roads, he needs ports, he needs people who understand tax ledgers as well as siege ladders. So he starts recruiting scholars, engineers, geographers, orders cities to be built or renamed after himself, obviously. At one point, there are over 20 cities called Alexandria across his empire. Fun fact, some of them still exist, like Alexandria in Egypt, still a major city today. Others are just dust and ruins now. But hey, branding matters. Yet, for all the grandeur, there are signs that the God King is cracking. You hear the whispers. Alexander's drinking more, mourning harder. He grieves Hephaestion, his closest friend, possibly more than a friend. With a grief so deep, he refuses food for days and demands heroic funeral rites worthy of Achilles. The death devastates him. Some say he never quite recovers. Then there's the incident with the Oracle of Siwa, years earlier in Egypt, still echoing through the court. The priests there had supposedly called him the son of Zeus. Whether it was true or not, Alexander began acting more divine. He expects people to prostrate themselves in his presence, a Persian custom called proskynesis. This deeply offends his Macedonian companions. You're a soldier. You've seen his feet bleed in battle, and now you're supposed to bow like he's a living god? The divide grows. Old friendships fray. Trust becomes rare. And yet, plans continue. Alexander wants to explore the Arabian Peninsula. He's got dreams of sending fleets to circumnavigate Arabia, map the unknown coasts, find new routes for trade. He wants to link the Mediterranean to the Indus, build a globe-spanning system that could outlive him. You can almost see the dream, a world where no one is Greek or Persian, but something entirely new. But then, he gets a fever. It starts small, as fevers often do. A headache, fatigue. He shrugs it off, drinks more wine, attends a banquet, then another, and then he can't get out of bed. For 12 days, Alexander lies in his palace in Babylon. His generals gather, trying not to panic. No one knows what's wrong. Malaria, typhoid, poison, historians still argue, even today. And here's the strange part. He stays lucid. He speaks. He gives orders. But his body fails him. The man who charged into arrows and survived blade wounds now fades from a sweat-soaked bed, whispering plans for worlds he'll never see. In his final days, his soldiers line up, thousands of them, just to see him, to touch his hand, to say goodbye. One soldier asks, "To whom do you leave the empire?" And Alexander, with a thin breath, is said to have replied, "To the strongest." It's poetic, it's vague, it's a recipe for disaster. Because once he dies on June 10th, 323 BCE, at just 32 years old, everything unravels. The generals known as the Diadochi begin scheming immediately. The empire is too big, too complex, too personal. Without Alexander to hold it all together, the unity he dreamed of begins to splinter. But you remember. You remember marching through deserts and jungles, riding beside a man who turned ambition into action, a man who believed in glory, not just for himself, but for the world he wanted to remake. And in that, maybe Alexander did conquer the world, not just with swords, but with imagination. Because long after the battles fade, his name lives. On coins, in stories, on cities, in legends, a boy who became a king who became a god who, at just 20, set out to rule the world, and nearly did. So, Alexander is gone. Just like that, the heart of the greatest military machine the world has ever known stops beating. And now, you're standing in Babylon, surrounded by confused generals, foreign scribes, grieving soldiers, and an empire held together with nothing but ambition and old promises. And what's the first question everyone asks? Who gets what? Alexander's empire wasn't designed for life with Alexander. No succession plan, no clear heir. Sure, there's a half-brother, Philip Aridaeus, but he has a mental disability. Then there's Roxana, Alexander's Bactrian wife. She's pregnant, but no one knows if it's a boy yet. So the generals gather in a tense, dusty room. The air smells like sweat and war, not royalty. These are men who followed Alexander into India, who shared his victories and his near deaths. And now, they're circling his empty throne like vultures. This is the start of what historians call the Wars of the Diadochi, the Wars of the Successors. Or, if you want the bedtime version, an extremely dramatic game of who wants to be emperor. And spoiler, everyone does. They divide the empire, not like a kingdom, but like a pie. Egypt goes to Ptolemy, a cunning general with a habit of smiling while scheming. Macedonia and Greece go to Antipater, an old-school conservative. The rich eastern lands go to Seleucus and others. It's not clean. It's not peaceful. You can practically hear Alexander yelling from the afterlife, "I said the strongest, not the greediest." What about Roxana's baby? Ah, yes, Alexander IV, a boy born after his father's death, technically the rightful heir. So they make him king, in name only, and place him under protection, which is fancy talk for he won't last long. Roxana, terrified, clings to power as best she can, but you already know how this ends. The empire is too unstable, too hungry for leadership. Within a few years, both she and her son are murdered in secret. No more royal bloodline, just memory. Meanwhile, the once united empire breaks into fragments, each ruled by a Diadochus who wants to be the new Alexander, but doesn't quite have the magic. Still, some of these fragments thrive. Take Ptolemy, for example. He takes Egypt and keeps it. Smart, stable, ruthless. He also takes Alexander's body, hijacking the funeral procession and bringing it to Memphis, then Alexandria. Because nothing says, "I'm your rightful heir," like showing off the founder's mummified corpse. Yes, really. Alexander's body becomes a political symbol, like a traveling holy relic, but with more abs. The Diadochi Wars rage for decades, battles upon battles, sons of generals fighting sons of other generals. And all the while, the memory of Alexander gets bigger, more exaggerated, more legendary. He's no longer just the boy who conquered Persia, he's the model of power, the gold standard. His image appears on coins. His stories are told in Egypt, India, Persia, Greece, even lands he never visited. And that's the twist, because even though his empire collapses, his influence explodes. Cities he founded become centers of learning, trade, and science. Most famously, Alexandria in Egypt grows into a glittering jewel, home to the legendary Library of Alexandria, where scholars gather to catalog all known knowledge. Greek becomes the language of the elite across the Near East. Greek art, architecture, and philosophy blend with Eastern traditions. This mix becomes known as the Hellenistic culture. Not quite Greek, not quite Persian, but something entirely new. You can still see it in statues, coins, ruined temples, even in the way we tell history. Alexander didn't just conquer people, he rewired the ancient world. Of course, not everyone saw him as a hero. Many Persians remembered him as a destroyer, a fire starter, a foreigner. In India, he was that curious invader who killed elephants and left quickly. And in Greece, some thinkers, like Demosthenes, had always warned that Alexander's power meant the death of democracy. Historians still argue, was Alexander a visionary uniter or a glory-hungry imperialist? And maybe he was both. Because here's the thing about empires, they don't just conquer land. They conquer time. They linger in the maps, the myths, the names carved into broken stone. Even now, you can trace his route, from Greece to Egypt to India, and find echoes of the man who once asked, "What worlds are left to conquer?" And yeah, okay, he didn't live past 32. But what were you doing at 20? Finishing school? Figuring out your taxes? Alexander was building libraries, launching ships, naming cities after his horse. Oh right, Bucephala, named after Bucephalus, his beloved steed who died in India. Yes, the horse got a city. What did your pet get? But the most powerful part of the story? The legacy wasn't in the land he held, but the people who carried his ideas. Scientists like Eratosthenes, who calculated the Earth's circumference from Alexandria. Doctors, poets, engineers, astronomers, all empowered by the networks Alexander accidentally built through conquest. It's like he cleared the stage and then left before the curtain rose. And now, centuries later, you're lying in bed, hearing his story whispered into the quiet night. The boy who raced across continents, the man who saw walls not as barriers, but as invitations, the king who refused to stop at enough. His empire didn't survive, but his shadow? That's still here. Long after the swords went dull, long after the altars crumbled, and just maybe, that's the real way to conquer the world. You wake up in the soft haze of early dawn, somewhere between a dream and a memory, and Alexander is still there, etched behind your eyelids like a constellation. But this next part, it's not about battles or borders. It's about the mind behind the myth. Because if you want to understand how a 20-year-old could conquer the known world, you can't just look at his muscles or his sword or even his war elephants. You have to peek inside his brain. Let's rewind to little Alexander. He's not just some princeling playing with wooden swords. No, his father, King Philip II, knew his son would one day rule, and so he gave him the ultimate gift, a private tutor named Aristotle. Yes, that Aristotle. The philosopher, student of Plato, teacher of logic, ethics, biology, politics, and now mentor to the boy who would reshape the world. Can you imagine your homework? One moment, you're learning how to stab a training dummy. The next, you're debating whether virtue is a habit or a state of being. And you better not mix up your syllogisms, or Aristotle's eyebrow of disappointment will strike you harder than any Spartan. Under Aristotle, Alexander read Homer's Iliad like it was scripture. He didn't just study Achilles, he became him, slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, modeled his courage, loyalty, even his hair after the hero of Troy. One quirky tidbit? He carried a dagger and a copy of the Iliad with him wherever he went, like a warrior scholar's travel kit. But it wasn't just books and battles. Aristotle taught Alexander about medicine, geography, astronomy, and how to question everything. So by the time Alexander rode into battle, he wasn't just fighting, he was thinking, planning, adapting, outsmarting. And that's where his genius really shone. Because being a military prodigy, that's impressive. But being a strategist who can read terrain like a poem, who uses rivers, sun angles, troop psychology, and cultural symbolism like tools, that's another level. Alexander understood that every empire was made of people, and people ran on belief. So he didn't just win battles, he crafted narratives. He positioned himself not just as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Remember when he entered Egypt? He didn't burn temples. He visited them, consulted priests, honored their gods. When the oracle of Siwa called him son of Zeus Ammon, Alexander didn't deny it. He wove it in his identity. Suddenly, he wasn't just a king, he was divine. Historians still debate whether he believed it or just used it. But either way, it worked. And then there's how he treated knowledge. In every city he captured, Alexander didn't just loot, he sent back samples. Animals, plants, maps, scrolls. He was building a database of the world, centuries before the word database existed. He even had scribes record strange languages, local legends, and new tech. It's like if Wikipedia wore a helmet and rode a warhorse. The man had curiosity that couldn't sit still. Here's a fun fact. On one of his campaigns, Alexander paused a siege to ask how tides worked. He didn't just want to break walls, he wanted to understand the universe. And that intellectual hunger was contagious. His companions, men like Ptolemy, Nearchus, and Onesicritus, weren't just warriors. They became explorers, historians, and thinkers. Nearchus would later map coastlines. Ptolemy would write histories, and of course found the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, which built the great Library of Alexandria. So when we talk about Alexander's legacy, we're not just talking about swords and soil, we're talking about the rise of global thinking. For the first time, ideas flowed across continents. Indian math met Greek philosophy. Egyptian medicine mingled with Persian astronomy. Coins with Greek gods circulated in Afghanistan. You could argue this was the first real globalization. But here's the twist. For all his brilliance, Alexander was still deeply, achingly human. He mourned. He raged. He made mistakes, some brutal. He once killed his close friend Cletus in a drunken argument. It haunted him. He cried. He fasted. He apologized. You don't see that in most conqueror stories. He was also deeply insecure, obsessed with legacy, haunted by death. Even at his peak, he worried he hadn't done enough, that the world was still too big and his time too short. And maybe that's why he pushed so hard. Because he knew that the gods don't grant second chances, that you only get one life. So you better ride fast, think faster, and leave echoes that last longer than the dust of your footprints. You're not just listening to history tonight. You're listening to ambition sharpened into purpose. The story of a boy who stared into the endless night sky, pointed, and said, "Let's go there," and did. You feel it now, don't you? The quiet behind the chaos. The real answer starting to form, not in the number of cities he conquered, but how he made people believe he could. And tonight, as you lie still, here's something wild to think about. Alexander didn't just fight armies. He rewrote the rules of kingship. See, before Alexander, kings were mostly about tradition. They dressed like their fathers, sat on the same thrones, worshipped the same gods. Their power came from bloodlines and rituals, very official, very stiff, very boring. Alexander? Not so much. He was inventing himself every step of the way. One moment, he's the dashing Macedonian warrior king. The next, he's dressed in Persian robes, seated on a golden throne, practicing proskynesis, the ritual of bowing to the king, which shocked his Greek companions. They hated it. "We bow to gods, not people," they grumbled. Alexander didn't care. He knew something they didn't. Image is power. And if you want to rule Persians, you don't show up as a stranger. You become something familiar, something divine, something royal in a way they already respect. Historians still argue whether Alexander's adoption of Persian customs was smart diplomacy or dangerous ego. But the results? Impressive. Rebellions dropped, tax flow stayed steady, administrators cooperated. He wasn't just conquering lands, he was merging worlds. But of course, not everyone liked the merge. His Macedonian troops, the original guys who followed him from Pella to the Indus, started feeling left out. Forgotten. They'd bled for him, and now he's handing out top jobs to Persians? Marrying foreign women? Wearing eyeliner? Tension brewed like storm clouds. Then came the moment that nearly shattered it all. After years on the road, in 324 BCE, Alexander hosted a massive group wedding in Susa. He and 90 of his officers married Persian noblewomen in one orchestrated ceremony, like a royal Tinder event on steroids. It was meant to unify the two cultures, a symbol of "we are one people now." But to the old Macedonian guard, it felt like betrayal. They didn't sign up for cultural fusion. They signed up for glory, loot, and keeping their beards unbraided. And when Alexander announced he'd be training 30,000 Persian boys in the Macedonian military style to be future soldiers, replacing the veterans who were tired, old, and opinionated, yikes. The veterans revolted. Yes, his own men, the hardened warriors who'd crossed deserts and mountains with him, refused to obey. They shouted, they cursed, they demanded to go home. So what did Alexander do? He wept, actually wept. Then gave them a scathing speech, how ungrateful they were, how disloyal. Told them they could go home, but they'd no longer be called his companions. That title? Given to the Persians now. Silence. And then they broke down crying. All of them. A full-on emotional meltdown in a dusty courtyard. Grown men sobbing like they'd just disappointed their favorite teacher, which, in a way, they had. So they apologized. He forgave them. Hugs were exchanged. Feasts resumed. You're probably thinking, wow, that's dramatic. But actually, this moment reveals the secret sauce behind Alexander's magic. It wasn't just charisma or cleverness. It was loyalty, the fierce, painful, tear-soaked kind that only comes from belonging to something bigger than yourself. Alexander made his soldiers feel like family, chosen, special. He remembered names, celebrated bravery, shared food, rode into danger alongside them. He got stabbed, shot with arrows, nearly drowned, and came back with scars and stories, not complaints. He wasn't a desk general. He was always in the mud, the blood, the mess, leading by example, not decree. And the men would follow him into any fire, even when they hated his decisions, even when they wanted to quit, even when their feet were blistered and their hearts were broken. Why? Because he gave them a story, not just of conquest, but of meaning. You weren't just a soldier in Alexander's army. You were part of history in motion, and he extended that same energy to civilians too. In newly conquered lands, he let locals keep their religions, built temples, paid respects to ancient gods, even tried to blend belief systems, sometimes comparing foreign deities to Greek ones so the two cultures could share worship. Like saying, your god and my god, probably cousins. This wasn't just tolerance, it was strategy. A psychological way to say, I'm not here to erase you. I'm here to include you. And that inclusion built trust. With trust came stability. With stability came legacy. You see where this is going? Alexander wasn't just good at war. He was revolutionary at rule. He may have been barely old enough to grow a full beard, but he governed with instincts some leaders never learn in a lifetime. He was flexible when it mattered, firm when it counted, and always, always chasing the next horizon, even when his body begged him to stop. Even when his men collapsed beside him, even when the world whispered, that's far enough. He never listened. Because to Alexander, the point wasn't just the empire, it was the vision. A new world stitched together from the old. Something wild, something massive, something worth remembering. And tonight, under your warm blanket and flickering bedside light, you're still remembering. Because some stories don't sleep, they echo. So now you're drifting beside him again. Alexander, the restless dreamer, pushing his empire deeper into the east, even as the edge of the map begins to curl like burnt parchment. Every step forward is a step into the unknown, but he doesn't slow down. He can't. Because by now, Alexander's not just chasing land, he's chasing something bigger: immortality. And in his mind, that lies somewhere beyond the horizon. By 327 BCE, Alexander has crossed the Hindu Kush. He's in what is now modern-day Pakistan, moving into India, where things get complicated. Because India, it's huge, it's hot, and it is not waiting around to be conquered. At first, things go smoothly. He allies with local rulers like Taxiles, who basically says, sure, come on in, just don't burn anything. But further east, others aren't so friendly. Enter King Porus, ruler of a powerful kingdom near the Hydaspes River. Unlike many before him, Porus doesn't flee, doesn't bow, and definitely doesn't flatter. He meets Alexander's invasion with full resistance, including a terrifying army of war elephants. Yep, elephants. Covered in armor, carrying archers on their backs. Imagine facing a wall of those in the morning fog. And Alexander? He's thrilled. You can almost hear him whispering, finally, a real challenge. The battle at the Hydaspes River becomes one of the most dramatic and brutal encounters of Alexander's entire campaign. The river is flooding. The rain is endless. The elephants are stomping men like grapes. It's chaos. But Alexander, always thinking 3 steps ahead, pulls off a sneaky nighttime crossing upstream, attacks Porus's army from the flank. Elephants panic. Troops scatter. Porus fights to the bitter end. Wounded, bloodied, towering on his elephant like a final boss in a strategy game. When it's over, Alexander doesn't celebrate. He walks up to the defeated king and asks, how would you like to be treated? Porus, still proud, replies, like a king. And Alexander, he smiles and says, then that's how it will be. He not only spares Porus, he gives him more land to rule, because Alexander doesn't just defeat enemies, he adopts them, turns them into allies, makes them part of the dream. It's not mercy, it's math. Why kill a king when you can keep one? But not everyone is on board with Alexander's eternal march. His soldiers are exhausted. Some haven't seen their families in 8 years. They're sunburnt, snake-bitten, and constantly wet. Every just a bit further feels like a lie. And finally, at the Hyphasis River, what we now call the Beas, they mutiny. Flat out refuse to go any farther. Alexander tries every trick in the book: speeches, promises, guilt trips, even silence. But this time, nothing works. He walks into his tent and stays there for 3 days. No food, just waiting. Eventually, his men get nervous. They realize if he dies here, so do they. So they beg him to come out. And he does. But he's changed. Gone is the invincible teenager who charged into Persia. In his place stands a man who finally, even legends have limits. He agrees to turn back. But not without style. They don't retrace their steps. That's for cowards. Instead, he builds a fleet and sails down the Indus River, mapping, studying, building forts as they go. He sends generals inland to explore and conquer on the side. Because if you're going home, you might as well conquer sideways. But nature isn't impressed with his ambition. On their return through the Gedrosian desert, disaster strikes. This place makes all previous hardships look like beach vacations. Blazing heat, salt-crusted winds, water that burns your throat, men collapse by the hundreds. Horses die, camels sink into sand and never come out. It's one of the worst military retreats in history. Worse than Napoleon's Russia campaign, some say. Alexander survives, but he's not the same. He's thinner, older. The fire is still there, but now it flickers. And yet, he keeps going. Because remember, he's not just building an empire. He's trying to transform the world. He returns to Persia and starts organizing his vision. New cities, new schools, mixed-race armies, cross-cultural festivals, even a universal currency. He plans massive infrastructure, a world-spanning road network, and intercultural training programs. You're lying there, cozy in bed, but his mind is racing across continents. He's dreaming of a world without borders, where East meets West in harmony. A world where a kid from Macedonia can walk through Babylon, learn Indian medicine, and speak fluent Persian. Sounds impossible, right? Well, so did conquering half the planet at 20. But here's the tragedy. Just as the plan begins to take shape, just when the maps are being redrawn and the architects called in, Alexander starts to get sick. Violently sick. Maybe it's malaria, maybe typhoid, maybe poison. Historians still debate what exactly happened in Babylon in 323 BCE. But within a few days, the most ambitious human being the world had ever known is dying. He's 32. He's lying on a couch, whispering final orders, eyes glazed with fever, surrounded by weeping generals who have no idea how to run his empire without him. They ask, "Who will inherit your kingdom?" And according to legend, he murmurs, "To the strongest." So now you're here, floating in the stillness after the storm. The young man who never lost a battle has lost his breath. The king who outpaced time has run out of it. Alexander is gone, and the room goes silent. You can almost feel the temperature drop, because everyone knew this day would come, but no one believed it actually would. Not Alexander, not his generals, not the world he stitched together with ambition and fire. And now, that world is beginning to crack. His body lies in Babylon. His empire stretches from the Mediterranean to the edge of India. But there's one major problem. He left no clear heir, no roadmap, no tidy list of instructions. Just that one cryptic line, "To the strongest," which, if you've ever met more than one ambitious man with a sword, is a recipe for chaos. Immediately, his top generals, known as the Diadochi, or successors, start circling like hawks, not mourning, plotting, because Alexander's empire might have been vast, but it was stitched together with his personality, his presence, his willpower. And now? Now it's every man for himself. At first, they try to pretend everything's fine. They crown Philip III, Alexander's half-brother, as a figurehead. He's not exactly known for strategy. Some accounts say he had cognitive difficulties. But hey, he's royal. Then there's Alexander IV, the baby boy just born to Roxana, Alexander's wife. Yes, a newborn. The empire is now technically ruled by a child and a man with limited mental faculties. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Within months, the generals are carving the empire like a pie. Ptolemy grabs Egypt. Seleucus wants Persia. Antigonus eyes Asia Minor. Cassander, not a fan of baby monarchs, seizes Greece and Macedonia. What follows is 2 decades of brutal infighting, assassinations, betrayals, and shifting alliances. Alexander's mother, Olympias, tries to protect her grandson. She's eventually executed. Roxana and little Alexander IV? Murdered, most likely on Cassander's orders. The dream? Unraveling thread by thread. But strangely, not vanishing. Because here's the wild part. Even as his generals rip the empire apart, Alexander's legend grows, faster than fire. Cities keep his name. Alexandria in Egypt becomes a hub of science, philosophy, and culture. Coins bear his image for centuries. His battlefield tactics get studied by Caesar, Napoleon, and West Point cadets. And his story? It becomes mythic. There's a famous tale, possibly fictional, possibly not, that his body was placed in a golden sarcophagus and displayed in Alexandria for years. Visitors from across the world came to see it. Even Julius Caesar supposedly stopped by, stood over the tomb, and wept. And honestly, can you blame him? Because even in death, Alexander was more alive than most rulers who ever lived. You're lying there now, wrapped in soft sheets, wondering, why does this all still matter? Here's why. Alexander didn't just conquer territory, he connected worlds. Before him, East and West were distant rumors. After him, they were in conversation. Ideas flowed like rivers: mathematics, medicine, astronomy, language. Greek became a common tongue across vast regions, laying the groundwork for what we now call the Hellenistic era. Think about that. He dies at 32, and yet 300 years later, people are still reading in Greek, debating Aristotle, and sculpting like Phidias. His generals may have stolen his land, but his culture? That endured. You can walk into museums today and see sculptures from Afghanistan that blend Greek facial features with Indian clothing. You can find cities in modern Pakistan where coins still bear Greek lettering. You can trace medical terms, math theories, and even city planning techniques straight back to Alexander's fusion of worlds. And yet, the man himself remains a puzzle. Was he a hero or a tyrant? A genius or a madman? A unifier or a destroyer? Historians still debate it. Some point to his generosity, his vision, his boldness. Others can't look past the bloodshed, the vanity the way he sometimes blurred the line between ambition and obsession. But one thing is certain, he mattered. He changed the shape of the world. And that's not poetic fluff, that's geography. So the next time you scroll through your phone, stumble across a map, and see a city named Alexandria sitting quietly on the coast of Egypt, remember, that's not just a name, that's a footprint. Left by a boy who became a king, who became a storm, who became a story. And maybe that's the real answer to our question tonight. How did Alexander conquer the world by 20? Because he didn't just conquer it with swords, he conquered it with ideas. He understood that the deepest victories aren't won on battlefields, they're won in memory. And that's where he still lives. Not in gold, not in maps, but here, in the soft buzz of your fan, in the hum of history settling into sleep, in the strange, wonderful truth that even now, over 2,000 years later, you're still listening. You're still with him, aren't you? Even though the empire is gone, even though his body is dust somewhere in a vanished tomb, you can still feel him, the force of that will, echoing across continents. It's like when you close your eyes and the after-image of lightning still lingers behind your eyelids. That's Alexander. But here's the strange thing. Even after all that conquering, all that running faster than anyone had before, Alexander never really got what he wanted most. Because what he craved wasn't just victory, it was unity. Remember when he married Roxana? It wasn't just romance, it was strategy. He wanted to bridge cultures. Then he took it further. In one massive event called the Susa Weddings, he ordered hundreds of his Macedonian officers to marry Persian noblewomen, a mass fusion of East and West. And while you might be thinking, wait, forced royal marriages don't sound super romantic, well, yeah, you're not wrong. But for Alexander, this was part of a grand experiment. He wanted to erase the line between conqueror and conquered. And guess what? People hated it. His Macedonian soldiers grumbled, the Persians felt suspicious, and the Greeks back home were horrified. He wasn't acting Greek enough anymore. He started dressing in Persian robes, adopting court customs like proskynesis. That's the thing where you bow or even kiss the ground before a ruler. And encouraging people to think of him not just as a king, but something more. That's when it starts to get weird. Some say he began believing he was a god, son of Zeus, son of Ammon, divine ruler. Now, maybe it was political theater. Or maybe it was heatstroke, ambition, and 8 years of nonstop war. Either way, people started whispering, he's going too far, he's lost touch, he's not one of us anymore. And if you're lying there wondering whether that's fair, well, welcome to the ongoing debate. Historians still argue, was Alexander a visionary idealist reaching for harmony beyond his time, or just an egomaniac who confused conquest with divinity? Whatever the truth, here's what's undeniable. He saw farther than anyone around him. He didn't want to be just another conqueror. He wanted to reshape identity itself. One world, one people, one dream. But like we've seen, that dream didn't quite survive him. The successors who took over? They weren't interested in unity. They wanted thrones, gold, power. Their empires, Ptolemaic Egypt, the Seleucid realm, Macedon, lasted for centuries, but they were built on division, not fusion. Still, little pieces of Alexander's dream did stick around. Ever heard of the Library of Alexandria? A vast collection of knowledge, funded and protected by his successors. They built it in his city, in his name. At its peak, it held over 400,000 scrolls, science, poetry, history, medicine, all gathered from across the known world. The dream wasn't dead, it just changed shape. It slipped out of palaces and crept into ideas. Even in religion, Alexander left a shadow. In some early Islamic and Christian texts, you'll find strange references to a figure called Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned one. Many scholars believe it's Alexander, depicted as a righteous king wandering the world. That's right. He might even be in your bedtime story and your ancient scripture. He becomes more than a man, a symbol, the conqueror of darkness, the bringer of light. And you know what's even more mind-bending? People kept pretending to be him. Centuries later, Roman emperors, Persian kings, even Napoleon would whisper, "I am the next Alexander." His image was engraved on coins long after his empire crumbled. His face, wavy hair, tilted head, lion-like gaze, became the look of power. And in 1494, a Persian manuscript showed up with artwork of Alexander fighting mythical beasts, crossing cosmic oceans, and discovering the Fountain of Youth. They called it the Iskandarnama, the Book of Alexander. Reality? Legend? Both? You're getting sleepy, but your brain is buzzing. Because that's what makes Alexander so endlessly fascinating. He's just real enough to be studied, but just mysterious enough to never fully explain. Like, how did he never lose a battle? Seriously, not one. How did his army cross thousands of miles, win dozens of wars, and never overthrow him? How did a 20-year-old walk into the Persian court, look at 1,000 years of history, and say, cool story, mine now? We still don't know. Maybe it was charisma, maybe strategy, maybe pure luck riding on the back of an overfed warhorse. But one thing's for sure, Alexander didn't just want to rule the world. He wanted to belong to all of it, to stand at the edge of the known and say, this is me now. And maybe that's why people still care. Because while most conquerors demand to be remembered, Alexander made you want to remember him. And here we are, wrapped in blankets, listening in the dark, whispering his name, still remembering. So here you are, still awake, barely, breathing softer now, eyelids heavy. And Alexander? He's still walking. Not in real time, of course, but in the soft, winding corridors of memory and myth. Let's pull the lens back one more time. Because tonight wasn't just about what Alexander did, it was about how he did it. And the answer isn't just swords or cities. It's something stranger, something you feel in your chest more than you understand in your head. See, the secret behind Alexander's rise by age 20 wasn't luck, and it wasn't just bloodline. It was a strange cocktail of three powerful forces: curiosity, charisma, and chaos. Let's unpack that. Curiosity was his motor. Most kings wanted gold. He wanted maps. He wanted to know what was beyond the next river, the next desert, the next impossible range of mountains. When his troops begged him to stop, to go home, he told them, "You may turn back, but I shall go on." Like he couldn't help himself. It wasn't wanderlust, it was obsession. He wanted to see the world, taste its languages, feel its heartbeat, and maybe, just maybe, become the glue that held it together. Now, charisma, that was his sword sharper than steel. He didn't just win battles, he won people. When he walked into Babylon, they crowned him. When he rode into Egypt, they called him a pharaoh. Even in India, where resistance was fierce, some locals still remembered him with honor. Why? Because he had that rare superpower, the ability to make you believe. Believe in the mission. Believe in him. Maybe even believe in yourself. You follow a guy like that, not because you have to, but because you want to see where he's going, even if it might kill you. And then, chaos. Not the kind that burns things down just to watch them smolder, but the kind that thrives in uncertainty. Alexander loved uncertainty. When most people ran from fog and unfamiliar terrain, he rode straight into it. He didn't just survive change, he became it. And that terrified people. It's why Persian nobles whispered behind silk curtains, why his own men started grumbling in the later years. Because when someone bends reality to their will, it's both inspiring and deeply unsettling. Historians still argue, was he building a better world, or just addicted to motion? Did he care about people, or just love playing God? You'll hear both sides. And both might be right. But here's the final twist in this midnight tale. For all his power, all his brilliance, all his vision, Alexander never built a system to last without him. No parliament, no philosophy of rulership, no instructions, just one man. And so when that man died, everything else began to unravel. Fast. It's like he built a machine with no off switch. He was the switch, and when the spark left him, the whole thing flickered out. But that doesn't mean it failed, because while his empire collapsed, his impact did not. The idea that a person could walk across the world and connect it, that dream, that stuck. You see it in trade routes that later became the Silk Road. You see it in the rise of cities built on blended cultures. You see it in art, medicine, language, philosophy, all buzzing with cross-cultural energy, sparked by this intense human meteor who lived for a blink and burned so bright. Alexander wasn't the first to dream big. But he might have been the first to dream globally. And that, more than his victories, is what made him unstoppable. You can conquer a city with a siege. But to conquer a world, you have to offer people a story they want to be part of. And tonight, curled up wherever you are, with that sleepy hum in your ears and the shadow of his legend flickering in your brain, you became part of it too. So, this is the end of the road. You've marched with Alexander across deserts, climbed snowy passes, stood at the edge of rivers with no names, and watched entire empires tilt on the hinge of his decisions. And now, just like his soldiers, you're probably wondering, what happened to him? Because here's the thing. Alexander didn't die in battle. He didn't fall to some epic final duel or go down in a blaze of glory. Nope. After all that chaos and conquest, his story ends in a quiet palace room in Babylon, surrounded not by enemies, but by advisors, generals, and silence. He was only 32 years old. That's barely older than a startup founder with a kombucha habit. But his body was failing fast. Fever, pain, delirium. Some say it was malaria. Others blame typhoid or drinking too much bad water. And of course, there are always the spicy theories. Was he poisoned? Did someone close to him decide the sun was shining a little too brightly and snuff it out? Historians still argue. You can almost hear the academic whisper fights. It was natural causes. No, it was political murder. No, it was autoimmune disease. No one agrees, and will probably never know. But what we do know is this. For 12 days he lay sick, barely able to speak. And then, just before the end, his generals gathered around him and asked the question that would haunt history. Who should inherit your empire? Alexander, barely conscious, allegedly whispered, "To the strongest." Talk about setting off a war before you've even gone cold. Immediately, his empire started to crack. Power-hungry generals grabbed territory, declared themselves kings, and got very stabby with each other. The Wars of the Diadochi, they're called. Decades of messy, blood-soaked chess. No one could agree on how to keep his dream alive, or whether they even should. And maybe that was the point. Maybe Alexander never meant for it to last. Maybe he was the fire meant to light something, not to maintain it. After all, he didn't train administrators. He trained dreamers, warriors, people who could move mountains, but not always organize them afterward. But before everything dissolved into squabbling kingdoms, his men did one last thing. They carried his body, carefully, reverently, wrapped in gold and myth. They wanted to bury him in Aigai, the old Macedonian capital. But halfway there, one of his generals hijacked the funeral convoy and rerouted it to Egypt. Why? Because holding the body of Alexander was like holding a nuclear crown. Eventually, he was entombed in Alexandria. Yes, the city he founded, now buzzing with scholars, traders, and dreamers. For centuries, people visited his tomb. Even Julius Caesar made the pilgrimage. And then, the trail goes cold. At some point, during the chaos of time, earthquakes, wars, shifting sands, the tomb vanished. To this day, no one knows where it is. And isn't that perfect? The man who wanted to know everything becomes the final unsolved mystery. Just imagine it. Somewhere, beneath layers of time and dust, maybe under a modern sidewalk, Alexander sleeps. No crown, no empire, just a stillness that doesn't match the wild beating heart that once shook the world. But even without a body, he's still here, in your city's street names, in your school textbooks, in the shape of old coins tucked into museum glass, in the way we talk about ambition, courage, overreach, in bedtime stories, like this one. That's how you know someone truly conquered the world. Not by holding it, but by living so loudly, the echo never fades. And now you've walked beside him. You've watched him rise, rule, stumble, and fall. You've heard his heartbeat in the drum of marching feet, felt the dust on your skin, seen the torchlight flickering intense as strategy turned into history, and all before falling asleep. Because some people dream in silence, and some people dream in empires. Wind down, 300 words. And now we rest. The battles are over, the horses unsaddled, the armor cooled and stacked neatly in some faraway corner of your imagination. You're safe now. Far from the noise of war drums, the pressure of crowns, the weight of ancient maps spread across marble tables. Take a deep breath. Let your chest rise slowly, like the tide touching a quiet shore. As we leave Alexander behind, picture him not in a storm of arrows or atop a mountain of conquest, but seated quietly, looking out at the edge of a calm river, the horizon tinted gold. There's no need to run anymore. No cities to burn, no glory to chase. Just stillness. And maybe that's the truest end of all great journeys. Not a fanfare, but a soft fading into peace. The kind of peace where even the loudest ambitions become gentle memories, where the conqueror becomes just a boy again, dreaming in the dark. So as your breathing slows and your body sinks deeper into the mattress, know this. You've traveled far tonight, and even though it was through story, it matters. Because the stories we choose to carry shape the way we see the world when we wake. And you? You chose one full of courage, curiosity, and impossible dreams. Let them echo quietly as you drift. Let the torchlight fade. Let the wind hush through imaginary banners above an empty field. Close your eyes and sleep softly, little world traveler. Tomorrow, there will be new empires to imagine.